Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take a monumental stack of sources, filter out the noise, and deliver the insights you need to truly understand the world's most massive cultural forces.
And today, wow, we are talking about a true giant.
We are strapping on our web shooters, testing our gamma tolerance, and shouting Excelsior, because we are launching a deep dive into the extraordinary life, the towering legacy, and the total revolution engineered by Stanley Martin Lieber.
The one and only Stan Lee.
Exactly.
You know, Stan Lee, born in 1922, was so much more than just a comic book writer or an editor. For 2 crucial decades, he was really the primary creative leader for what became Marvel Comics.
He took what was basically a small, struggling publishing division.
Timely Comics, a family-run business. And he transformed it using this revolutionary approach to storytelling into the multimedia giant that, I mean, let's be honest, dictates so much of the global film industry today.
So our mission today is to unpack exactly how. How does a kid who dreamed of writing the great American novel end up co-creating the most successful fictional universe in history?
It's an incredible journey.
We're going to trace it from the poverty of the Depression-era Bronx through that white-hot creative crucible of the 1960s Marvel Revolution, all the way up to his incredibly complex and sometimes, well, fraught late-life role as Hollywood's favorite figurehead.
In that late life role, it gives us this staggering opening statistic because of his ubiquitous, his highly anticipated cameo appearances in all those Marvel films.
You waited for them in every movie.
We did. And because of them, our source materials confirm that Stan Lee holds the almost unbelievable distinction of being the actor with the highest grossing film total ever recorded.
That's just wild.
The scale is immense, stretching from, a $2.50 essay contest prize all the way to a multi-billion-dollar box office tally. That's the scope of the life we are analyzing today.
Okay, so let's unpack that foundation. To really get Stanley the man, we have to go back to Stanley Martin Lieber, the kid.
Yeah.
He was born December 28th, 1922 in Manhattan.
Right, but his early circumstances, they deeply shaped everything he would go on to write.
For sure.
His parents, Celia Solomon and Jack Lieber, were Romanian-born Jewish immigrants. And the defining context of Stanley's early childhood was the Great Depression. It hit them hard.
His father was a dress cutter.
A dress cutter by trade, yeah.
Yeah.
But work became sporadic, sometimes non-existent. And that economic strain, it forced the family to move all the time, eventually settling in this cramped apartment at 1720 University Avenue in the Bronx.
And that location, that apartment in the Bronx, is so crucial. It speaks directly to the lack of space, the lack of comfort in his youth.
Totally. He and his younger brother, Larry Lieber, who, also became a longtime Marvel writer and artist himself.
Right, the whole family was in.
The whole family. They shared a single bedroom while their parents were sleeping on a fold-out couch in the main living space. This is not the life of a future celebrity. It was a life defined by instability.
Which made him desperately seek an escape.
And that escape came through pure imagination. They often talked about how he was just profoundly influenced by books and movies, these grand, heroic narratives.
He loved figures like Errol Flynn, the Swashbucklers.
Oh, absolutely. But the most revealing influence he ever cited was the Scarlet Pimpernel. He actually called that character the first superhero I had read about.
Think about that for a second.
It's perfect, isn't it? A masked figure with a secret identity, fighting for justice against oppressive forces, completely outside that typical capes and tights mold. It perfectly foreshadows his own later creations.
So he had the spark, this desire for grand, heroic stories. But his core ambition, his career goal, was all about one thing.
Literary respectability.
Yes, he was grinding away at all these part-time jobs, not just to survive, but specifically to finance his real dream, writing the great American novel.
And he looked down on comics. The field that would make him famous, he considered it, completely beneath that ambition.
It's the ultimate irony.
The list of his part-time jobs is an absolute testament to that early grind. He wrote obituaries for a news service.
Imagine a future comedic powerhouse writing strictly about death.
I know. He created press releases for the National Tuberculosis Center. He was an usher at the huge Rivoli Theater on Broadway. He sold newspaper subscriptions. He was building up this rich supply of real-world experiences, even if he found the jobs, frustrating.
And his literary ambition wasn't just a dream. There's that great anecdote about the essay competition that really shows his unrelenting drive.
Oh, the New York Herald Tribune story.
Yeah, he claimed he won their biggest News of the Week contest 3 straight weeks in a row, forcing the newspaper to ask him to step down to give other people a chance.
It's such a great Stanley story, and as much as we want that dramatic version to be true, our sources note that the reality was a bit more modest, though still impressive.
What actually happened?
He likely won a seventh-place prize of $2.50 and earned 2 honorable mention awards. But even those smaller achievements got him recognized as this promising, persistent young writer. And crucially, he graduated early from DeWitt Clinton High School at just 16 and a half in 1939.
And that early graduation in 1939, that brings us right to his reluctant entry into the world of comics.
Hmm.
And it was all because of family connections.
100%. His uncle, Robbie Solomon, helped him get a job at Martin Goodman's new Timely Comics division, which was the direct ancestor of Marvel. Goodman, the publisher, was married to Leigh's cousin, Jean. It was a deeply familial setup.
And he was hired as a general assistant by the editor, Joe Simon. And the initial duties were famously menial, right?
Oh, decidedly so. A world away from the literary salons he dreamed of. He was the office boy, he filled the inkwells for the artists, he was the runner who fetched lunch, he did proofreading, and maybe most tellingly, he had to erase all the initial pencil lines from the finished pages.
And that menial start is precisely what leads to the most famous pen name in pop culture.
It is. He made his official comic book debut in Captain America Comics #3, May 1941, writing this tiny text filler piece called Captain America Foils the Traitor's Revenge.
And he used the pseudonym Stanley.
Deliberately. It was a shortened version of Stanley, and he used it specifically to save his birth name, Stanley Martin Lieber, for the serious literature he still planned to write one day. He felt genuine shame about working in the low-status, pulp medium of comic books.
It's the ultimate historical irony. The name he used to hide his identity became the identity that defined him for the entire world.
And even in that tiny text story, there's a significant creative milestone, isn't there?
There is. Within that little text filler, Lee debuted Captain America's trademark move, the ricocheting shield toss.
Where it bounces off multiple opponents and comes right back to his hand.
Exactly. This seemingly small contribution was later adapted back into the actual sequential art. It just shows that even in the very early days, he was already focused on defining the iconic visual language of heroism.
And then he moved up incredibly quickly.
So fast. The original creative partners, Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, they had a falling out with the publisher Goodman, and they left Timely in late 1941.
And Goodman needed a new chief editor and art director, so he installed the barely 19-year-old Stanley Lieber in the role.
That is a staggering promotion.
The young man who was hired to erase pencil lines was suddenly the editor and art director, and he stayed in that position, in one form or another, until 1972, a 3-decade tenure.
But that incredible run was interrupted by World War II. He served in the U.S. Army Signal Corps from 42 to 45, initially focused on repairing communications equipment.
But he was soon transferred, leveraging his writing skills, into the training film division. There, he worked on writing manuals, training films, slogans, all designed to help the war effort.
And his military classification was unique.
Playwright. He would later joke that only 9 men in the entire U.S. Army held that exact title. He was always distinguishing himself, even in the service.
And he was working alongside some truly incredible talents during that time.
He really was. The training film division was this hub of creative genius. He worked alongside the legendary Hollywood director Frank Capra and the children's author Theodore Geisel.
Better known to us as Dr. Seuss.
Dr. Seuss.
Yeah.
It was a fascinating, high-level creative environment, totally separate from comics.
And that wartime service also gifted us the ultimate anecdote about his dedication to deadlines.
Yes, the deadline incident. This is great. Lee was still sending in assignments to Timely on a weekly basis, and he had to meet this strict Monday deadline.
Yeah.
Well, one week, the mail clerk failed to deliver the assignment letter. Lee saw the envelope from Timely inside his closed mailbox and, in a complete panic, refused to wait.
What did he do?
He took a screwdriver and physically unscrewed the hinges of the mailbox to get the assignment.
That's audacious.
It is. He ended up facing tampering charges for illegally accessing federal property, but thankfully a colonel intervened, recognized the absurdity of the situation, and saved him from discipline. But it illustrates this deep, almost obsessive dedication to his commitments.
Even for a job he supposedly didn't respect.
Exactly. So after the war, by the mid-1950s, the company is now operating under the name Atlas Comics, and it was essentially a genre factory.
They published everything.
Everything. Romance, westerns, sci-fi, horror, crime. And Lee, as editor-in-chief, was responsible for generating a huge volume of this material. And the sheer breadth of it led to this creative exhaustion.
He was burning out.
Totally. By the end of the decade, he was so dissatisfied with the low status and limitations of the medium that he was seriously considering quitting comics for good.
It was a creative lull, a kind of existential crisis for his career. But it was exactly that moment of resignation and dissatisfaction that set the stage for the massive, unexpected creative explosion of the 1960s. Okay, so we're transitioning now to the moment the sources identify as the biggest catalyst for change. The superhero genre was reviving.
Right. DC Comics had struck gold again, first with The Flash and then with the formation of the Justice League of America. They were a huge success.
And Martin Goodman, the publisher of what was now Marvel, saw the money DC was making.
And he challenged Lee directly, create a new superhero team for us. And Lee was approaching this final decision about whether to leave the industry, and this ultimatum gave him this unexpected freedom.
And this is where his personal life intersects with history in a truly profound way. His wife, Joan Bucock, offered the critical advice that changed everything.
She knew how dissatisfied he was, and she suggested that since he was ready to quit comics anyway, he should just use this final assignment to write the stories he wanted to read without worrying about what a comic book was supposed to be.
He had nothing to lose.
Exactly. Nothing to lose by experimenting. And that pivot, it wasn't just about trying something new. It was about shifting the entire philosophical framework of the superhero.
He took that advice and introduced what he famously called flawed humanity into his characters. This fundamentally moved away from the traditional, perfect, ideal archetypes that DC was still largely promoting.
That's the key distinction right there. DC's heroes were gods among men, perfectly adjusted, they never worried about rent, they had this unquestioning moral certainty.
But Marvel's heroes were people first.
Yes. The characters they created in the 60s, they weren't just powerful, they had bad tempers like the Thing, crippling vanity like Iron Man, real financial woes like Spider-Man, and profound inner angst like the Hulk.
Comics historian Peter Sanderson famously compared the resulting Marvel output to the French New Wave in filmmaking.
Because it was revolutionary. It used pioneering storytelling methods focused on deep characterization, and it attracted this massive new demographic of older readers, college students, and teens by addressing serious contemporary themes.
It was a genius move. Relatability made the characters immortal. You didn't just admire a Marvel hero, you empathized with them.
Right. They got bored. They argued amongst themselves constantly. I mean, look at the Fantastic Four, and sometimes they even got physically sick. They were subject to the same mundane pressures as their readers.
And the first result of this shift was the Fantastic Four in 1961, co-created with Jack Kirby. The immediate, explosive success of that title confirmed the market wanted this complexity, and it launched an unbelievable creative cascade.
The creative partnerships of this era are, of course, the stuff of legend. But they're also the source of so much historical tension. With Jack Kirby, Lee co-created the Hulk, Thor, Iron Man, the X-Men, the Avengers,
while also successfully modernizing and reviving Golden Age characters like Captain America and the Submariner.
A prolific run. But the sources are clear that despite this, there was significant contention later on, particularly over the creation credit for the Fantastic Four.
Why was that initial credit so complicated?
Because of the working method they developed, which we now call the Marvel method, it fundamentally blurred the lines of creation. While Lee generated the concept, the title, the character names, Kirby the artist, often had immense input on the actual plot structure and the visual look.
Giving him a powerful claim to co-creation.
A claim that was never formally acknowledged at the time. Then, of course, we have the equally crucial partnership with Steve Ditko,
which yielded Doctor Strange and, of course, Spider-Man, Marvel's undisputed most successful character.
And Lee's vision for Spider-Man was a direct reflection of this new philosophy. He chose Ditko for the project over Kirby because Kirby's initial sketch of Peter Parker was, well, it was too heroic, handsome, and muscular.
He wanted the opposite of that.
He wanted a neurotic, awkward, physically unimpressive, even nerdy kid, a character that Ditko was uniquely skilled at visually realizing.
And with Bill Everett, they created Daredevil. But the narrative thread binding all these figures together, the final piece of the revelation, was the commitment to a truly, thoroughly shared universe.
Game changer. Before Marvel, if one company published 3 heroes, they might as well exist in separate vacuums. Lee insisted that if the Hulk rampaged in New York, Spider-Man might hear about it, and the Fantastic Four would definitely read about it.
This shared reality made the entire world feel tangible and interconnected.
And this incredible output, we're talking about generating multiple successful titles every single month under crushing deadlines. It necessitated an entirely new way of working.
The famous Marvel method. Let's break down exactly how it worked and why it defined their legacy, for both good and for ill.
It was pure necessity, born from Lee's massive workload. Instead of writing a full panel-by-panel script, which would have been impossible for one man managing so many titles, Lee would first brainstorm the core story with the artist.
Who then became a co-plotter.
Exactly. And Lee would only write a brief 2 to 3 page synopsis.
So the artist didn't just receive a script to draw. They received a prompt and were expected to construct the narrative flow visually.
Precisely. The artist, whether it was Kirby or Ditko or someone else, was expected to act as the true co-plotter. They had to determine the panel arrangement, the pacing, the action sequences. The whole narrative structure needed to fill the page count. They were penciling the visual first draft of the story.
And only after the artist turned in those penciled pages did Lee step back in.
Correct. Lee would then fill in all the dialogue, the word balloons, the captions, and supervise the final finishing steps like lettering and coloring. In essence, the artists were determining the beats of the story.
And Lee was providing the voice, the bombast, and the witty banter that defined the Marvel brand.
But that leads to the big question, right? If the artist was the co-plotter, visually determining where the story went, why was Lee credited as the sole writer?
That's the vulnerability. The fact that the artists were performing such a high level of creative work, that's what eventually led to the deep, long-standing tension between him and figures like Kirby and Ditko.
Absolutely. The tension was inherent in the method itself. For Lee, he was the primary writer because he created the original concept, the core characters, and ultimately provided every single line of dialogue the reader consumed.
But for the artists,
They felt they were creating 80% of the narrative, structurally, visually, rhythmically. They felt they were writers who just happened to use pictures. It was a structural conflict over ownership and credit that overshadowed much of Lee's later life because the work-for-hire contracts of the era just ignored the artist's immense contribution to the plot.
it's a fascinating and complicated dynamic. But beyond the internal process, Lee's recognizable dialogue style was a massive selling point. It wasn't simple, it was often bombastic and surprisingly verbose.
Oh yeah, his dialogue was full of flair, sophistication, and a surprisingly advanced vocabulary for a supposed children's medium.
He had a great quote about that.
He did. He famously defended the practice, playfully noting that forcing a kid to stop and go to a dictionary is not the worst thing that could happen. He wanted the comics to elevate the reader, not pander to them.
And the revolution extended directly to the readership. Lee was a master of building fan culture and loyalty, creating a connection that no other publisher could match.
He was the first to standardize and normalize the practice of introducing clear credit panels on the splash page of every story. He didn't just name the writer and penciler, he included the inker and the letterer.
Which gave a level of transparency and recognition that was previously unheard of in the industry.
He also basically invented the modern editorial persona. He wrote the incredibly lively, chatty, personality-driven bullpen bulletins column and managed the letter pages with this friendly, informal style.
His explicit goal was to make fans feel like the creators were friends,
Yeah.
not these distant, anonymous professionals.
And it worked. That's why letters started addressing them by their first names, like Dear Stan and Jack, instead of the highly formal Dear Editor that rivals used. It fostered this unprecedented and long-lasting sense of community.
This cultural creation even extended to merchandising and clubs. He co-founded the Merry Marvel Marching Society fan club in 1965.
And of course, he created his own personal iconic brand with his trademark sign-off,
Excelsior.
Excelsior, which is also the New York State motto, tying his personal ambition directly back to his New York roots.
So as the 1960s roared on, the social relevance and depth of Marvel's characters increased dramatically. And this was primarily driven by the phenomenal success of Spider-Man.
Right. After Steve Ditko left Marvel in 1966, John Romita Sr. took over as the primary artist on The Amazing Spider-Man.
And the book just exploded.
The transition was seamless. The book quickly surpassed Fantastic Four to become the company's absolute top seller. And Lee and Romita used this platform not just for action, but for deeper character study. They focused heavily on Peter Parker's dual existence.
His social life, his college life.
Mm-hmm.
They used Empire State University as this perfect setting for topical storytelling.
They weren't just telling superhero stories anymore, they were actively engaging with contemporary cultural currents.
So what were some of the most challenging issues they tackled?
Well, they dove right into the political and social issues facing their young adult readership. They addressed the reality of the Vietnam War draft through the storyline with Flash Thompson, who volunteers for service.
Wow.
They dealt with political elections and social manipulation through the Richard Raleigh subplot, and they constantly explored student activism and protest culture within the fictionalized setting of Empire State University. It proved superhero comics could be relevant, serious literature.
And beyond addressing the topical issues of the day, Lee used this era to make genuine strides in racial representation. In 1966, he and Kirby co-created Black Panther.
This was monumental. T'Challa the Black Panther was not a sidekick or some token figure. He was mainstream comics' first black superhero, introduced as a respected, sophisticated, technologically advanced African king.
Which was a hugely significant step away from the historically stereotypical or simplistic depictions of black characters in American media at the time.
A year later, in 1967, Lee introduced Robbie Robertson in The Amazing Spider-Man. And Robbie was an important, more subtle form of representation.
How so?
He was one of the first African-American characters in comics to hold a serious, complex, professional supporting role. He was J. Jonah Jameson's highly respected colleague at the Daily Bugle, frequently serving as Peter Parker's mentor and a voice of reason. His complexity was a quiet revolution.
And then in 1969, Lee teamed up with artist Gene Colan to create the Falcon.
The Falcon, Sam Wilson, was the first Black American superhero. This brought the concept of Black empowerment and heroism closer to the American domestic sphere, and he often worked alongside Captain America. These moves really demonstrated Marvel's willingness to use their platform to reflect and maybe influence contemporary social discourse.
But the most famous confrontation Lee engineered against the established norms involved the Comics Code Authority.
Ah, yes, the CCA. The self-regulatory body from the 1950s that policed content with this incredibly strict set of rules. This showdown in 1971 fundamentally changed the industry.
And the challenge wasn't even initiated by Lee, which makes the outcome so fascinating.
Right. The U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare actually approached Lee and requested that Marvel create an anti-drug storyline. They recognized the reach and influence of Spider-Man.
So the government asks for it, and Lee delivers a 3-issue subplot in The Amazing Spider-Man about prescription drug addiction and its real-world consequences. What was the Code Authority's reaction?
They outright refused to grant its seal of approval because the Comics Code strictly forbade the depiction of drugs. Any drugs. It didn't matter what the context was, whether it was positive, negative, instructional, cautionary. The CCA was rigid and totally incapable of interpreting intent.
So Lee found himself in this impossible position. A government agency wants the story published, but the industry's own gatekeeper refuses.
And Lee, confident that the credibility lent by the government request outweighed the authority of the CCA seal, made a truly unprecedented and brave decision.
He published it anyway.
He published the entire story arc without the seal. At the time, that was a huge commercial risk. Distributors and newsstands often refused to carry uncoded comics.
But the gamble paid off massively, didn't it?
It did. The comics sold well, Marvel received widespread praise for its socially conscious efforts, and more importantly, the absurdity and rigidity of the CCA's refusal, I mean, they were censoring a federally requested anti-drug message, came under intense public scrutiny.
And that indirect pressure forced the Comics Code Authority to loosen its restrictions shortly after. It paved the way for more mature, realistic storytelling for the entire industry.
And Lee used this momentum to continue his advocacy, not just in the stories, but explicitly in his editorial voice.
In Stan's soapbox.
Exactly. He regularly addressed social issues like racism, intolerance, and prejudice directly in his monthly column. He genuinely believed that if you had a powerful platform like Marvel, you had a responsibility to speak out against injustice.
This period really marks the culmination of his creative leadership. In 1972, after a 30-year tenure, he finally stopped writing monthly titles to succeed Martin Goodman as publisher.
His final regular issues were The Amazing Spider-Man number 110 in July 72 and Fantastic Four number 125 in August 72. And it's telling that he briefly served as the company president, an ostensibly higher role, but he intentionally stepped down.
Why reject the presidency?
Because he found the role was too focused on the financial side, on numbers and finance. And it took him too far away from the creative energy he thrived on. He preferred the hands-on, creative publisher position. He always identified as a creator first.
And even after stepping away from the monthly comic grind, he kept writing. In 1977, he launched the Amazing Spider-Man newspaper strip.
which became a long-standing fixture in papers across the country. And in 1978, he re-teamed with Jack Kirby for The Silver Surfer, the ultimate cosmic experience.
That's considered Marvel's first true graphic novel, right?
It is. Another pioneering move, this time into the adult bookshelf publishing space. He also co-created Savage She-Hulk with John Buscema in 1980, so his creative hand was still visible right before his next big transition.
And that transition takes us away from the New York bullpen and into the entirely different high-stakes arena of Hollywood.
Right. In 1981, Lee physically moved to California with a very specific future-forward goal to focus exclusively on developing Marvel's vast potential for TV and movie properties.
This marked his official, if gradual, shift from being the chief creative officer to becoming the ultimate corporate figurehead and media producer.
Totally. He was instrumental in developing early adaptations and, of course, began his ubiquitous presence as an executive producer and the king of the cameo in nearly all Marvel media.
But he still did some comics.
He'd make these occasional high-profile returns, yeah. Notably The Silver Surfer, Parable limited series with the legendary French artist Moebius.
So by the 1990s, the official change was complete. He stepped away from regular Marvel operational duties, though he was maintained as chairman emeritus with a highly lucrative $1 million annual salary.
And that financial stability, it allowed him to explore entrepreneurial ventures outside the direct Marvel structure. This leads to the highly complex and, well, often problematic business phase of his life.
Starting in 1998 with Stanley Media.
Yes, an internet-based superhero studio he co-founded with a man named Peter Paul.
And this was during the height of the dot-com boom, so Stanley Media grew incredibly rapidly. It went public in 1999, valuing Lee's name incredibly high. But the sources indicate the collapse was swift and tied to some severe illegality.
It was catastrophic. By late 2000, investigators uncovered illegal stock manipulation orchestrated by Peter Paul and another corporate officer, Stephen Gordon. The company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in February 2001.
And it's crucial to emphasize, as our source material does,
that Lee himself was never implicated in the illegal stock manipulation scheme. He was a victim of it too.
Following that collapse, he quickly formed his next venture, POW Entertainment.
Purveyors of Wonder. Formed in 2001 with Gil Champion and Arthur Lieberman, specifically focusing on developing film, TV, and video game properties.
POW had a much longer run, but it produced some famously unconventional projects.
Showcasing Lee's willingness to experiment, for sure. This included the risque animated superhero series Stripperella for Spike TV, and he also hosted the reality competition show Who Wants to Be a Superhero.
Continuing his brand as that accessible, friendly mentor.
And we can't overlook the fascinating moment where he crossed the corporate aisle and worked for the competition.
DC Comics.
In the early 2000s, DC published the Just Imagine series, where Lee reimagined their iconic heroes, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, collaborating with top-tier artists like Jim Lee and Joe Kubert. It just showed that his cultural status transcended corporate boundaries.
Now we enter the challenging era defined by intellectual property disputes and a long string of lawsuits, starting with the very company he built, Marvel. In 2002, Lee sued Marvel.
Yes, he did. And let's talk about the nuances of that complaint. Lee sued Marvel because he claimed they were failing to pay him his agreed-upon 10% share of the profits from films featuring his co-created characters.
This is where we need to be very clear about the legal history. He didn't own Spider-Man or the Hulk outright, did he?
No, he didn't. Like Kirby and Ditko, Lee created those characters under the traditional work-for-hire model. If you were a salaried employee, the characters you created were legally owned by the company. But Lee, unlike many of his former collaborators, had managed to secure a separate agreement in the 1990s that guaranteed him a specific percentage, 10%, of future profits from media licensing of those characters.
So the lawsuit wasn't about creation rights. It was about breach of contract on profit sharing.
Exactly. It was a fight for the money generated by the media boom that he himself had catalyzed. And that lawsuit was ultimately settled in 2005 for an undisclosed but massive 7-figure amount. It confirmed he was owed a significant share of that revenue.
The business complications continued, though, and they escalated dramatically in his final years. POW Entertainment was acquired in 2017 by a Chinese company called Cansing International.
And this happened at a time when Lee was dealing with his wife's terminal illness and his own failing eyesight. The situation quickly deteriorated. In May 2018, Lee filed a staggering $1 billion lawsuit against POW Entertainment.
$1 billion. What was the specific nature of the alleged deception?
Lee alleged he was systematically misled. He claimed he was convinced to sign a document that he believed was a non-exclusive license for his name, image, and IP to be used by Kamsing. It turned out to be an exclusive license,
Which he asserted he would never have knowingly signed.
especially while he was so emotionally vulnerable after his wife's passing. He also contended that POW had illegally taken control of his social media accounts and was impersonating him online.
That is a staggering claim of manipulation. What was the outcome of that billion-dollar lawsuit?
In a complex turn, the suit was dramatically dropped just 2 months later, in July 2018, before it could advance through the courts. The reasons for the withdrawal remain ambiguous, but were widely tied to the various power struggles that were surrounding Lee at the time.
Unfortunately, the legal battles continued even after his death. His daughter, J.C. Lee, entered the fray.
She filed a new lawsuit in 2019, trying to regain IP rights from the earlier Stanley Entertainment period, claiming that partners had misled her father about various deals.
And that lawsuit did not go well for her.
Not at all. In 2020, the court dismissed her claims, calling the lawsuit frivolous and improper, and resulting in severe sanctions, $1.25 million, against both J.C. Lee and her legal team.
This entire period, it just reveals a man who had always been the energetic, in-control face of his company becoming so vulnerable.
And that vulnerability led to the darkest part of this story: serious allegations of elder abuse and isolation that emerged after his wife's death.
The Hollywood Reporter published a detailed investigation claiming Lee, whose wealth was estimated around $50 million, was a victim of financial and emotional elder abuse. It's a tragic irony that the creator of so many heroes was left so unprotected in his final years.
Kia Morgan, who had become Lee's business manager and was a known memorabilia collector, was the central figure in these allegations.
Morgan was accused of isolating Lee from long-trusted friends, professional associates, even his family, in an effort to gain increasing control over his substantial wealth.
A temporary restraining order was issued against Morgan in August 2018, and the allegations eventually led to criminal charges.
Right.
In May 2019, Morgan was charged with multiple counts of elder abuse, including grand theft, embezzlement, and forgery, underlining the severity of the alleged financial exploitation.
And Morgan wasn't the only manager Lee sued, was he?
No, he also filed a fraud lawsuit against his former manager, Gerardo Olivares, with similarly serious allegations, claiming Olivares convinced Lee to allow transfers of millions of dollars and manipulated him into changing his will. It paints this deeply unsettling picture.
We also have to mention the sexual harassment allegations that surfaced in early 2018.
A small number of nurses working for Lee came forward with claims of sexual harassment. Lee immediately denied the allegations, countering that they were fabricated attempts to extort money from him. It's just a complex, messy, and profoundly sad final chapter for such a beloved public figure.
And despite the profound business and personal turmoil of his later years, Stan Lee's monumental cultural legacy remains utterly unquestionable.
Oh, absolutely.
On a personal note, he was married to Joan Bucock for 70 years, from 1947 until her death in 2017.
They had 2 daughters, Joan Celia J.C., born in 1950, and their second daughter, Jan Lee, who sadly died just 3 days after her birth in 1953. And that loss undoubtedly contributed to the emotional weight of his life.
Lee's lifelong commitment to education and the arts found a major outlet in his philanthropy. In 2010, he founded the Stan Lee Foundation.
The foundation was specifically focused on literacy, education, and the arts, and it actively promoted diversity across creative fields. He also had a deep appreciation for history. He regularly donated massive amounts of personal papers, photographs, and effects to the American Heritage Center at the University of Wyoming.
Providing invaluable primary source material for future historians.
Exactly. And of course, the role he's best known for by the current generation is the king of the cameo.
Every single Marvel film.
Everyone. These cameos were a vital link between the history of the comics and the new media. He received an executive producer credit, and the appearances became this essential, highly anticipated, and often self-aware nod to his creations, a personal signature.
What's truly remarkable is that his status as the universal elder statesman of comics transcended traditional corporate battle lines. He literally appeared in the rival universe.
He did. Lee was so beloved and respected that he was granted a cameo as himself in the DC Comics film Teen Titans Go.
Into the movies.
It just illustrates his status as a universally acknowledged cultural icon.
His final emotional cameo was in Avengers: Endgame, But that final appearance also marked an ending for that tradition.
Yeah. Following his passing, Marvel Studios enacted a formal policy, out of deep respect, that forbids the use of archive footage for any future cameos. They wanted his final appearance in Endgame to serve as his true, definitive curtain call.
In terms of formal recognition, the accolades he received are extensive. He was inducted into the Will Eisner Award Hall of Fame in 1994, and notably, the Jack Kirby Hall of Fame in 1995.
He received the National Medal of Arts in 2008, a truly high honor recognizing the profound literary and cultural impact of the medium he helped legitimize. And in 2017, he was recognized as a Disney legend, alongside his sometimes contested creative partner, Jack Kirby.
That Disney Legend ceremony included having his hands, feet, and signature imprinted in cement at the TCL Chinese Theater,
Permanently enshrining him in Hollywood history, right where he had worked as an usher all those decades earlier.
It's incredible. Furthermore, his impact was recognized locally by numerous cities that declared Stan Lee Day.
Los Angeles, Boston, New York City. And in a beautiful tribute connecting his roots back to his success, a specific section of University Avenue in the Bronx, right where his family settled during the Depression, was officially named Stan Lee Way in 2019.
Stan Lee died on November 12, 2018 at the age of 95 in Los Angeles. The official underlying causes of death included respiratory failure and congestive heart failure.
Roy Thomas, his successor as editor-in-chief at Marvel, visited him just 2 days before he passed. And Thomas recounted that Lee was still incredibly enthusiastic, already discussing potential future cameos.
Just demonstrating his lifelong excitement and dedication to the creative process right to the end.
And his very last known words to Roy Thomas provide a touching and familiar sign-off to his long, complex history with the company.
Oh, were they?
Lee's final recorded words to Thomas were, "God bless, take care of my boy Roy," referring to Thomas's long-standing nickname, Roy the Boy Thomas. It was a final, familiar salutation, linking him back to his familiar persona, Stan the Man Lee, and the familial atmosphere he fostered at the Marvel bullpen.
So looking back at this tremendous decades-long journey, we trace the path of a writer who transformed global culture, not by meticulously sticking to his initial plan, but by embracing the creative freedom that came from abandoning his self-imposed limitations.
Exactly. He began life as Stanley Martin Lieber, this ambitious young man who believed pulp writing was inherently beneath him, dreaming of that lofty, conventional, great American novel.
And the irony is profound and truly defines his life. By adopting the pen name Stan Lee to shield his serious identity, and by giving himself explicit permission to just have fun with the despised medium of comics, a suggestion sparked by his wife, he created a monumental, multifaceted, and enduring legacy far larger than any single novel could ever achieve.
He innovated storytelling with the Marvel method, which simultaneously enabled massive output and created deep creative tensions. He humanized superheroes, built an unparalleled personal fan culture, and directly challenged industry censorship to bring maturity to the medium.
And his characters now form the basis of our modern cinematic mythology.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we have to ask you, the listener, a final provocative thought. Reflect on the massive discrepancy between Stanley Lieber's youthful, conventional goal of writing the high-minded great American novel and the actual world-changing legacy he achieved by embracing a medium he initially considered beneath him.
So the question is this: was his world-changing success driven by the very fact that he gave himself permission to be commercially successful and culturally profound only after he gave up on his original, loftiest, and perhaps most creatively restrictive literary goal?
It's something to think about.
Truly something to think about, and perhaps apply to your own ambitions. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive on the incredible, complex life of Stan Lee.
Excelsior. We'll catch you next time.